Hello there.
What a political move to stick two fingers up at Suella Braverman.
Politics at Jack and Sam's is the podcast where we tell you what's going to happen next week in the wild world of Westminster.
My name is Jack Blanchard of Politico, and with me, as always, is the great Sam Coates of Sky News.
Keeping you ahead of the political agenda.
One top civil servant said to me they're 70-30 in favour of thinking something will happen as soon as Monday.
Sam, is it going to happen, yes or no?
Listen to Politics at Jack and Sam's wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, I'm Matt Barbet, and today on The Daily, we're looking at what is meant to be one of life's happiest and most joyous moments. But for thousands of mums, it's proving to be one of the most traumatic.
I felt like if someone had just listened to me in the beginning, I wouldn't have gotten to this point where I was so exhausted and so tired and not being given pain relief and not being believed that I was in labour. It was actually really an awful experience that left me feeling like I wasn't important.
A landmark inquiry into traumatic births has found that care is of a shockingly poor quality. Women told it they were left in blood-soaked sheets, that problems caused by trauma were covered up, and they were denied basic things like painkillers.
I think we are in a position of transition. NHS England itself acknowledges it's going to take time to make all of these changes across the country.
The government has apologised for the state of maternity services, and we'll hear from the Health Secretary on what she's going to do to fix the problems, and how one woman was let down by the NHS. But first, our correspondent Laura Bundock, who's been following the story for us.
Yeah, so this inquiry, which is the first of its kind, it was only last year, unbelievably, that birth trauma came up in Parliament. And so this inquiry was as a result of the huge response to it popping up from politicians who were speaking of their personal experience. Theo Clark, the Conservative MP, told how she thought she was going to die. So anyway, they appealed for testimony from women who had suffered in this way and were overwhelmed by the response. I mean, over 1,300 women got in touch, some of them having experienced birth trauma recently, some many years ago, but it has left them scarred, both physically and psychologically. I mean, reading through some of the testimony that was submitted, it's really harrowing. I mean, one woman saying, I was literally left lying on the ground in pain, wanting to die because the pain was so intense and unbearable. Another talking about how she was covered in blood and her own faeces, but there was no one to help her wash. Literally a plastic sheet was put on the bed and I lay on it in my filth. These stories are harrowing and heartbreaking, and I think really expose the huge suffering that for so long I think women have suffered in silence about.
There are two sort of main themes that come out of this. One that is familiar with people looking at the NHS and one that really isn't. The first one being staff shortages, which we hear a lot about with the NHS. But the second is the attitude of staff towards women. Are the two things connected?
It's interesting, isn't it? So I think, yes, there is definitely, in some cases, a culture of cover-up that was exposed. But look, looking more generally, you got a sense that a common theme from all these women, and speaking to other women who've experienced, a birth trauma, is that they knew something wasn't right and they weren't listened to. I mean, actually, one of the women giving her testimony to this inquiry spoke about an uncaring midwife who was sort of telling her to buckle up, basically, when she was wincing in pain, that they were being put down as an anxious mother. And of course, you've got very vulnerable women here. They're going through something for the first time. You're always told it's going to hurt, but how do you know when it's hurting, is hurting too much, or if it's normal pain? So there was all that feeding into it. So there is definitely perhaps a sense that women weren't listened to properly. But I think also you pointed to a culture within the workforce that was simply compassion fatigued, as one woman has put it to me, that these are people who are overworked, they're under-resourced, and it means they simply don't have the time. And this is, what women want. They want to feel like they're being heard. No one goes into becoming a midwife or any sort of profession related to maternity wanting to cause harm, wanting to cause birth trauma. Of that, I am absolutely sure. But I think you have a broken workforce here, and a lot needs to be done to improve that.
And midwives, like you say, are trying to do their best for the most part, but they're under so much pressure, and even more so because births have been getting more complicated.
Yeah, they have. I mean, I think a lot of the problem stems from the fact you don't need to go back that far to find women in their early 20s settling down, having a family. For so long, that seemed to be the traditional thing to do. But now we've got a very different kind of cohort of women in the UK who are perhaps having children later. We've got a far more diverse population in the UK as well. And there are certain factors that present themselves when you're looking at older mothers. You're looking at people from certain ethnic backgrounds, Black and Asian women, and the statistics sadly do point to the fact that they are more at risk of birth trauma, regardless really of their background. When you're sort of comparing them with the white cohort, this is what's happening. And so, yes, it is a very different situation in maternity services. The patients are different, but it doesn't seem like the attitudes have shifted with that. And I think that is one of the problems. I think there is a feeling that there is a sort of underlying misogyny almost with some of the way that women are treated. And that really has been very, and if not very, too slow to evolve.
Thanks, Laura, for now. We'll come back to you in a minute because I know you've been speaking to Victoria Atkins, the person ultimately in charge of deciding what the government's response might be to all this. But now let's speak to someone who's experienced some of what this report is talking about. Tinuke Awe is a mother of two.
Well, the kids are kids.
A handful.
I've got a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old now, and my 4-year-old, she's just about to start school. She's super excited.
But she's also the co-founder of the campaign group 5 Times More. It's a grassroots organisation that's committed to changing and highlighting Black maternal health outcomes in the UK.
Midway through my pregnancy, I was showing signs of preeclampsia. So I had protein in my urine as well as high blood pressure, but it wasn't picked up. I guess, lack of continuity of care. I didn't see the same midwife for my appointments, and they didn't put the two together that, this is a little bit dangerous. So by the time it was my last midwife appointment at about 38 weeks, she took one look at me and she was like, you need to go straight to the hospital because I am worried. And so I did get to the hospital and I was told, look, you cannot leave this hospital without having the baby. You've got preeclampsia and it's very dangerous for you and it's very dangerous for baby. So that was it. I wasn't given a choice. It was more, you can't leave. You've got to have this baby and it's got to happen now. Not, here is what's happening. Here are some risks that happen if you don't go through with this induction. And nothing was properly explained to me. I was just scared and told I had to do this.
At that point in time, were you reassured, though, that you were in the hands of the experts? You must be thinking, well, they must have done this kind of thing dozens, if not hundreds of times, so I'm in the right place.
Yeah, you'd like to assume so, right? But that wasn't necessarily the case for me. With the induction, they said, well, this is going to take at least 24 hours for it to kick in. And when they put it in, I was like, okay, absolutely fine. I guess we'll wait for it to start. And a couple of hours later, I started feeling a bit of pain in my tummy. The pain started getting progressively worse and progressively closer. Everything was pointing towards the fact that I was indeed in labour, but we asked the health professional, the midwife, to check me over, and they wouldn't check me over. They refused to check me over, and didn't believe that I was in labour until my waters broke, and then all chaos had broken loose. I wasn't given any pain relief. I was about 9 centimeters and ready to essentially push, and my baby's heart rate was dropping. So it was all going on, when they press the emergency button and like 10 people run in, that's kind of what happened. And I felt like if someone had just listened to me in the beginning, I wouldn't have gotten to this point where I was so exhausted and so tired and not being given pain relief and not being believed that I was in labour. It was actually really an awful experience that left me feeling like I wasn't important. No one cared about what I had to say about my own body.
And the context here, Tinuke, is what good looks like because you had a good second birth subsequently.
Yes, exactly. So I had my second 4 years ago. If you cast your mind back to 4 years ago, we were in the middle of the pandemic. So really, really scary time, really scared of going into hospital, contracting COVID. I had a great birth. I had a great birth because the midwife listened to me. She empowered me. She made me feel like I was the one in control. She told me to listen to my body. She encouraged me to listen to my body rather than, the first time I remember saying, oh, I really wanted to push. And they were like, no, don't push. You're going to reverse everything. And they were shouting at me and it was awful. It was such a bad experience. And the second time round, they gave the power back to me and it ended up being a brilliant experience.
If you could affect a positive change, if you could make it better for new mums subsequently, what kind of things would you do?
I think first and foremost is listening to women and meeting them where they are. I think it's so important to listen to women and not just listen to answer, but actually listen with empathy. And I know the NHS is stretched. The midwives are leaving in their troves. I know it's a really tough time on that side as well. But just for people to realise just that short hour or day or whatever, however long you're staying in the hospital, the impact, the level of impact that has on you, on your baby and beyond is incredible. If I could sum it up in a nutshell, it would be to listen to women.
OK, we're going to pause there. We'll be back in a moment with what the Health Secretary says she's going to do to make maternity care better. Welcome back. Laura Bundock is still with me. And Laura, with all this evidence being gathered, all of this testimony from so many people coming forward to talk about it, what kind of recommendations is the report making?
It's made 12 individual recommendations, but what it ultimately wants is a very joined up, overarching maternity national plan, basically. And they want that plan implemented and coordinated and run and managed by a maternity commissioner. So like a maternity czar, which we have for other areas and other departments. But there are, as I say, 12 recommendations, and they're talking top of that list is the retention, the recruitment and the training of more staff, not just midwives, obstetricians, anaesthetists as well. And it goes all the way down to offering better support for fathers who are involved in this. They're often dealing with the consequences of birth trauma, that not enough's been done about that. But like I say, a list of 12 points they want the government to implement within and into the NHS.
Laura, what else are people saying about this? Anything from midwives or NHS leaders, for example?
Well, certainly on the front line, I think those who've been campaigning about birth trauma are desperate for this inquiry to report back. They've been waiting for this day. It really means a lot because this, they say, is something they've been talking about for a long time. Finally, they feel it is getting the political attention it needs to bring about the change. Regarding other senior kind of figures in this area who are looking at this and who are listening to this, the NHS England Chief Executive Amanda Pritchard said today that those testimonies from those 1,300 women were simply not good enough. I think there's a real reflection there that everyone accepts this is a problem, something needs to change. How and if that does change, well, that's the bigger problem, isn't it?
Do you know what, Laura, we've heard retention, recruitment and training applied to so many different areas of our lives, and here it is once more being applied to maternity care. And in fact, this is just the latest report on maternal outcomes in recent years. Is it likely to have any more impact than the previous ones?
Look, I think this is the fear, isn't it? We've had several awful, devastating maternity scandals. Each time an investigation is carried out, a report is written, an independent report is written. It makes a number of recommendations. But I think the fear is that despite the number of recommendations, despite the repeated cycle of these scandals that present themselves, if the change is coming, for some it certainly isn't coming soon enough. And I think that is the worry. Will this inquiry have the teeth to bring about the change that it says is so badly needed?
Just to finish off, I know you've spoken about this to the Health and Social Care Secretary, Victoria Atkins. What does she have to say in regards to the government's response?
I sat down with her, and she's not been in the position that long. She wasn't even Health Secretary when Theo Clarke MP stood up in Parliament and first raised the subject of birth trauma. She says, look, she does want to listen to the voices of women. She said to me, I say that not just as Secretary of State for Health, I say this as a mum. And her childbirth, she says, had some moments of joy, but it also had some moments that are very dark and frightening.
So I completely understand why women and their families are worried about the reports and the findings in it. For the first time in the NHS's history, you have not just a Secretary of State for Health who is a mum, but also the Chief Executive of NHS England is a mum as well, Amanda Pritchard, and we are working together to try to address some of these issues that we know have arisen in recent years.
Look, she says she's read the report, the inquiry report, obviously, and it says things are changing. But obviously, the change takes time. There is this new 3-year strategy. There's a big sum of money to pay for that and to try and recruit the staff. But she admits, I don't pretend we're there yet. We should be genuinely turning a corner, but it's going to take time. She said, I'm being completely frank, we're in a period of transition. She says we're beginning to see changes, but of course I accept there is much more work to do.
That is it for today. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back tomorrow. See you then. Bye-bye.